canoeing or kayaking here in Pennsylvania. So she started the recording. I'm shutting up now.
Got it.
Oh, all righty. Here we go.
So I should talk now?
Sure, Ed.
Okay, well, indeed, we come as a pair. It wasn't supposed to be like this originally, but Susan keeps pulling my butt out of the fire all the time as our technical guru down at Canoe Cruisers Association of Greater Washington. So I'm feeling much more at ease tonight having her onlooking. But I guess I'm ready to take over. And first, just a few housekeeping items. I've never done a hybrid Zoom live show like this. So the standard stuff is please check your cell phones and so you're not disturbing your neighbors while I'm babbling away or putting you to sleep. It might wake you up. And as far as the three of us, Susan and Michelle, don't forget to mute. Nobody's above being told that. And last but not least, if you have some questions, I'll try to beat you to the punch, but if you would please save them for the end, and I will stay here as long as you will. I'm comfortable, I'm at home. So that's about it. So let me start off by saying, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
No, that's great. I'm pleased to have been invited to do this. And it's not the first time, but it's been a long time. And I want you to know that I still have the t-shirt that you all gave me. I wear it proudly, especially when I'm doing something illegal. So you guys get blamed, not my club. So I'm, as I say, I'm very glad to be here, but I'd really rather be paddling, and I bet you would be too. Have you had a good year paddling? I know you can't answer me, but I have done well, and when you think about it, that's pretty impressive because it takes a lot to get out on the river. Think about it. I mean, look how dry it's been all fall. You check the gauges, your favorite stream's a dribble. And maybe some of you say, well, I don't care, I'm a lake paddler. Well, yeah, but if there's a forecast for 30-mile-an-hour winds or a line of deadly thunderstorms and tornadoes possible that day, you're not going out on that lake. And of course, there's the classics, you know, the grass ain't gonna mow itself, right? And I hate to bring this up, but that flapper valve in your bathroom, it's been leaking for 3 months. Are you ever gonna do something about it? I mean, have you seen your water bill lately? So much distracting you away. And then there's world affairs and geopolitics. Some of you are looking kind of strangely at me. Doesn't that affect you when you're going paddling? Well, it sure has for me. Well, let me give you an example. The year was 2016. The big news was that Russia has sent its troops into Crimea, and the talking heads on TV were just going crazy about this. What next? Well, one of the things they were saying is that probably it will be the Baltic states. And so I immediately went to my Atlas and Gazetteer and checked this out. And I found these little countries just filled with rivers that I had never run. Oh, and that means rivers I had to run. And it was pretty clear that this could stop me. It was pretty clear that I could not let Putin beat me to the pudding. No. So with that, let me duck off to the side and oops, wait a second. Here what happened? I thought I had the stuff down. All that practice and okay, now I'm nice and slick. So you may have guessed why the topic of this discussion is what it is. And that was my goal. So, on the slightest possibility that you are geographically challenged, let me introduce you to the Baltic states. Oops, shoot. We're having, so the icons are covering, oh, there we are. The icons were covering up my ability to advance. So, in fact, if you'll give me a chance, I want to see, there. Are the icons going on the side? Well, hopefully they are. Well, on the slightest possibility that you are geographically challenged, let me introduce you to the Baltic states. They are 3 countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, sandwiched between Poland and Finland. Please, I repeat, please do not mistake the Baltics for the Balkans, those bunch of countries like the old Yugoslavia and Greece and Romania and Bulgaria that anchor the bottom of Europe. These places could not be more different culturally, topographically, or climatologically. Well, let me tell you, up to then, this region had not exactly beckoned me. My normal Bible for European paddling, the German Canoe Federation's guidebook series, had but an anemic selection of rivers described, and an internet search was not much more productive. Now, the place, by its location, seemed like it might be cold, bug-infested, and flat. These countries look pretty tiny on the world map, yet there would be 5 challenging languages to deal with: Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Russian, and Polish. But the prospect of the place becoming a war zone was just too much to ignore. So I booked a flight for me and my trusty boat. Well, let me orient you just a little bit more with a close-up map before I start belting out unfamiliar and exotic place names. Please note the capitals: Tallinn for Estonia, Riga for Latvia, and Vilnius for Lithuania. They are wonderful places, well worth sacrificing some river time to explore. Note the chunk of real estate in the lower left, Kaliningrad. It's a stranded piece of Russia. That doesn't sound too good, does it? Well, of course, they call these the Baltic states because they are along the Baltic Sea. Now, if I had a topographic map to show you, you wouldn't see any mountains, no. The highest land is in the southeast. It's about 900 feet above sea level, but that's enough so that the flattish land does tilt, meaning the rivers would have some gradient. Woo-wee! Well, so on May 5th, 2017, my boat and I hopped a Lufthansa jet to Munich, where I procured a vehicle and then slogged through the long drive past Berlin and Warsaw to the Lithuanian frontier. All of these countries being in the EU, I slipped in as quietly as I would to Pennsylvania. Oh, before I go any farther, let me remind you about how this solo paddler operates, whether in Pennsylvania or Transylvania. First, I go to the put-in and find a safe place to leave my boat. I don't want it stolen. I seek out a nearby house or business. Of course, that means I have to explain my needs to the occupant, who presumably does not speak English. Well, I am not a quick study with languages. So to accomplish this in foreign lands, I prepare a monologue ahead of time. I did this for this trip by making the rounds of the respective embassies for some free translation, and they were so nice they did it. Well, hopefully after the occupant reads this, they don't try to answer me. Well, they answer me with a yes or a no. Any more information in their language, which I don't understand, only creates confusion. After that, I drive to the takeout and get back by the most appropriate means, which usually means hitchhiking. Well, I wasted no time in finding rivers, starting in southeast Lithuania, much of which is within Žukia National Park. Well, the first run was down the Gruda. The Gruda is just a ditch at the put-in, festering with these annoying little low footbridges, but soon enough, it reverted to its natural state, which is pretty much a looping path through sand hills, but sometimes offering fast water, and that's nice. I told you, it's pretty early in the spring when I was there, but marsh marigolds hinted of better times to come. Did you know they actually have beaver over there in Europe? I always associated that with North America. Well, the Gruta was such a good experience. Decided to try the next river over the hill, the Ula. I needed a permit to paddle the Ula because in season, it's so popular they limit entry. But today I had the river to myself. Now, as I stated, this is all a national park. Now, understand European national parks are seldom like ours. They strive to preserve places that have already been settled for 1,000 or more years. So you'll find villages and farms, livestock, and many more man-made influences coexisting with nature. One feature in Žukia is the effort to preserve a traditional but still occupied village named Žirvinos. And that's where I started. But first, I explored the village. And it was fun to wander around this place. And the takeaway from doing so was that in this forested region, wood is the preferred building material and fuel. Well, leaving the town, from here on down, it was just me and nature. The water moves along nicely, except we're blocked by the occasional strainer. You know how that is. But this is not such an obstacle to stop people during the season from loading up their boats and camping, taking advantage of the numerous prepared campsites along the way. Where roads cross, even if it's just a footbridge, there's signage to tell you where you are, and that's nice. Now, one spot we're stopping at is Ulos Akis, which I think translates that to be the devil's eye. And it is this evil-looking spring, bubbling gray muck on the bottom. I was not tempted to sample it, even if it's a fountain of youth. Well, the Gruta, obviously the Gruta and Ula were to my liking, and they flow into the Murkies. So I gave that a try too. It's interesting. For example, at its takeout, there's a fine specimen of a hill fort. Now, back in the Middle Ages, the residents built these mounds and crowned them with wooden fortresses, akin to what we had on the American frontier. There just isn't a lot of rock around there to build your traditional castle. Well, only the earthwork has survived the years, and I understand there are about 1,000 of these scattered around Lithuania alone. But let me tell you, nothing could prepare me for partway through the trip, rounding a bend and coming upon the pyramid. The pyramid was built in 2002. I think it's a place to retreat and contemplate life and spirituality. And in spite of some Christian symbols, I think it's largely non-denominational. It certainly is dazzling, though all that glass really does not work too well for birds. But every story has two sides, and if you interview the amputee lizard, he would probably say, good, the fewer birds, the better. And last but not least, if you long for a good view, the Lithuanians more than compensate for the fairly flat landscape with some world-class lookout towers. There's one near the takeout. Well, you'll note that I began this 6-week trip in early May. I want you to understand the objective was to catch the place as it warms up, but not be there so late as to be there when the plague of blood-sucking bugs hatch. Well, in a 6-week period, every day cannot be perfect. And I did have a little bit of wintry weather, but it sure was pretty. Food. The bowl of pink stuff is not Pepto-Bismol, but rather cold beet soup. It's delicious and would probably qualify as the national dish of Lithuania. Well, when I go abroad, I largely eat out, wanting to experience the cuisine of the region. There were some challenges in the Baltics. Eating out is just not nearly as widespread as in the USA, and many sizable towns seem to lack restaurants. So I learned to seek out tourist destinations to find those restaurants. For this area of Lithuania, my go-to feed was the spa town of Druskininkai that I fondly remember for its town park's musically oriented sculptures. And by the way, when I did find myself in a restaurant desert, the trick was to find a local supermarket, open until 10, which always has a prepared food section where you can pig out on a tasty array of dishes for really cheap prices. Sounds good? Well, I want to take a break from paddling in rivers for a moment right now, and let's go check out the big city, the capital, Vilnius. Here, as with most big cities, I parked my car on the fringe and took the train into downtown. Approaching the main station, I got my first taste of Lithuanian humor. Uh, uh, uh. Well, hearkening back to an era when all these cities were fortified, I entered the old city, which is really your destination in places like this. I entered the old city through an old gate and then made a beeline for the town plaza, which was roomy enough, at least on this day, for both man or woman and beast. The bustling commercial district was marked by classic old Europe architecture. And as capital city should be, Vilnius is a cosmopolitan place where English pops up in strange ways. Well, for your information, Zeppelini, often in humor called Zeppelins, are a substantial glob of potato dough filled with meat, cheese, mushrooms, etc. They are belly busters, especially ponder that a kilogram is 2.2 pounds, which may explain how some Lithuanians got so darn big. Of course, you can expect to find music in the streets as you ogle the fine details of the buildings. I know nothing about architecture or design. I just know I like it. And of course, as in any European city, it's just littered with churches, places interesting outside and in. I get the impression that love of the outdoors seems to be in the culture. And the cities all come with lovely, expansive parks. And they really seem to like fountains over there. And many of these have choreographed outputs with colored lights. It's quite a show. And what self-respecting park would be complete without a good carousel? Sadly, though, some corners of these beautiful cities do suffer from vandalism. What a shame. But let's keep an open mind. Wall art can be nice, especially if you go to a little street called Literatu Gatve. Now, everybody quiet down now, because we have to sneak by the sneaking cat. It can get very cranky when you wake it up. We succeeded. So before you is just over a block of outdoor art. Really neat stuff. I don't know how it survives the elements, but it does. Even the manholes in the street are artsy. And should you be inspired to decorate your body with art, there is a tattoo parlor on that street that apparently does pretty good work. Well, wandering around the nooks and crannies of these places can bring surprises, like a statue in a mural in an obscure parking lot that on closer inspection turned out to be a tribute to Frank Zappa. Now, I researched it, and Zappa was not a Lithuanian, but apparently he is just beloved in Lithuania, and his fans wanted to commemorate him here. So keep on exploring. Well, getting back to rivers, you might want to check out the Shashia, which is nearby and inviting. Certainly get you back into the outdoors. You may get to see some wildlife like deer or those beaver I talked about. And the solitude's only occasionally broken by somebody's vacation hideaway or maybe a traditional farm. But wait a minute. Let's take another look at Vilnius, but not as a pedestrian now, but as a paddler. You see, Vilnius sits astride a big river called the Daenerys, and on top of that, it has a tributary running through the city called the Vilnia. So I put in on the Vilnia, just a rushing little creek, and enjoyed the ride toward the city at the base of beautiful, massive sandstone bluffs with spring just busting out all over. Signs of the city soon enough began to appear. First the new and then the old. Some of you may think, what a drag paddling through a channelized river. But they do things right over there. And even something as mundane as the underside of a bridge can be really interesting, not to mention the retaining walls. Just everything special in an old place like this. Well, when I did this run, it was a weekend and a nice spring day at that. And the banks were populated with future boaters in training, lonely maidens waiting for Prince Charming to come floating to her in a canoe, and just the masses hanging out, soaking up the rays. Getting down toward the mouth of the creek is the granddaddy of all hill forts, it must be. And apparently there they actually had some stones scrounged up for a more lasting palace. About that time, I was surprised to be overtaken by a fleet of kayaks, rental people who I usually don't really care for. No offense if there's anybody in the audience, but these people were really nice and personable, and I hung with them on out to the bigger river. I particularly bonded with this one couple, this one pair, a father and a child. And it may have had something to do with the fact the child was more than willing to share his or her chocolates with me. Well, you're probably wondering, what's so special about the Daenerys? Well, the other boats, they are really cool. Made me sort of have boat envy, my plain old little C1. Another thing that's neat are the bridges, which demonstrate that you can combine utility with art. Now, the passage of rivers through a lot of cities is always not too great, and sometimes not too great. The ugly industrial side is there, or maybe it's hidden from the city by levees. Not so in Vilnius. You get to see a lot, and seemingly some of the best. And it's not just the old, but the new also. This is a bustling up and coming place. Things are happening there, and they're able to hire some good architects with great imaginations to build, build, build. And it's going on right now. In fact, they have such great imaginations, some things I just can't figure out. Well, it is, though, an urban river. So your banks are either retaining walls or levees. But I thought that was pretty cool, those pockmarked levees. I felt the pockmarks were about the size of my butt, which means this would make a great outdoor stadium for a water event, huh? But my kayak friends pointed out the fact that nobody ever thought to put drain holes in those pockmarks. So probably another couple of weeks, this will be a mosquito nursery. Not my problem. I'll be gone by then. Well, sadly enough, this tour of Vilnius ended in a junkyard. No big problem. It's just that I didn't know the neighborhood and wasn't sure where parking was legal. So I paid a few bucks and knew that I'd find my car when I got to the end. In good shape, too. Well, okay, I'll leave Vilnius. But if you do visit Vilnius, that's hard to say, any tour would not be complete without a visit to the nearby town of Trakai with this iconic castle. It's a good place just to hang out by its lakes, or maybe do a romantic boat ride with your sweetie, or to eat. You know that I like that. You see, around the year 1400, members of a Judaic sect from Baghdad were brought in to serve as bodyguards for the king or the duke, or whoever's in charge of this joint. Their influence remains today in the signature delicacy of this area, kibbenai, which is really just a variant of the Welsh pasty. It's delicious, especially when combined with the side order, a heap of boiled or roasted potatoes. All right, moving on to water. Yes, water. You're all canoeists. I can glean some great information at the Tourist Bureau in downtown Vilnius. So I commenced exploring streams in the greater metropolitan area to the north and to the east. One thing that most of them had in common is that they were small streams, sometimes very small, and back in the woods. And as you might guess, strainers might just be a problem when you're doing things like this. But I'm not as stupid as I look. I went and researched ahead of time and figured out what streams had liveries on them. And sure enough, all of those streams were sawed out 100%. So I did not suffer. Well, when I think of the Musa, besides just being a nice trip in spring, it reminds me of, well, for lack of better words, totem poles. These things dot the woods, the riverbanks, the fields all around Lithuania. Who would guess? This is also good time to bring up another nice feature of these rivers, steps at the bridges. Think about this. The next time you're wading up or down through briars and poison ivy to your favorite stream. Not so if you go to Lithuania. Great idea, huh? Ah, these rivers, just a great place to be. Place to pause and sniff the flowers, to encounter wildlife, maybe some of which you might not want to encounter. But I guess cliff swallows are okay. And if you really have a taste for bigger birds, you may be surprised to find out that Lithuania has the highest stork density in Europe, which is kind of ironic because they have a very small population, which runs in complete conflict with what my parents taught me growing up. The Schwentoi. I devoted 2 days to the Schwentoi. As stated earlier, the first part of my daily routine is to find a safe place to leave my boat, which is not always easy in these underpopulated countries. On the Schwentoi, the nearest place was a bed and breakfast about a quarter mile from the put-in. Ugh, wasn't looking forward to that. But when I returned from shuttling, the proprietors just would not allow me to tire myself with a long carry. So the mister hooked up a trailer to his car, loaded my boat on, and transported me to a secret launch spot within a few feet of the bank. What an act of kindness. Well, the Schwentoi proved to be another very loopy river. Now, I was there before the season, but another couple of months, this place would be just mobbed with paddlers. Many of them setting out to do an overnighter, taking advantage of the numerous prepared campsites. And they're really pretty good spots, and I just love their signage. Well, my first day's run ended by the twin-spired church in the city of Anikshai. About that twin-spired church. Okay, gather around. I want to make sure you hear this. It's an important story. According to legend, this much beloved church was correspondingly despised, just despised by the devil. Did I say he hated that church? So one day he decided he was going to do something about it. And he assumed the form of a giant bird and then clutched in his talons a giant boulder, which he picked up and carried toward town, planning to do you know what, a bombing raid. Well, this was early. He left in the night, and coming dawn, he approached the town, and a rooster crowed, and it startled the devil, so much so he lost his grip on the boulder and it plummeted harmlessly into the nearby forest. Well, actually, a family of chipmunks got crushed, but we call that just collateral damage. So that's the true story. And that stone lives today in the forest. It's called the Puntuka stone. And the reason it seems dark is that I chose to sleep by it for good luck one night. Well, one other thing about Nikshai is that it has a great traditional restaurant. And I highly recommend the giant potato pancakes, something your cardiologist would strenuously frown on, I'm sure. But all this is a good time to address what happens later after all this gorging, and I don't mean a heart attack. So I hereby declare that all 3 Baltic countries have the best and cleanest restrooms I have ever seen. I truly believe it would be worth going over there and doing a restroom tour. It would be satisfying. Well, back to the river. On the second day, I was treated to the site of a big tower. When I went up to investigate, I discovered it was part of a tree canopy course. Cool, huh? I don't think the thing was open, and besides, I was too cheap to buy a ticket. So after exploring around a little, I returned to the river, hung with the fellow boaters, and took off, but with the company of a cute little hitchhiker, which remained until I took aboard another hitchhiker. Guess they didn't like each other. Well, on to Latvia, where I started with another city detour, this time to their beautiful capital, Riga. Again, wishing to avoid the traffic and navigational challenges and parking restrictions of a strange big city, I parked on the fringes and took the train in. Now, this worked just fine going in, but I have to tell you, going out on the last train of the evening, I misunderstood the announcer and got off one stop too soon, ending my day with a 7-kilometer hike. Oh, my feet still hurt just thinking about it. But let me tell you, pulling into that Riga station, it was so cool arriving and realizing that with one more ticket, I could be in Moscow. This was my Dorothy, you're no longer in Kansas moment. Well, though I was a pedestrian today, the city tried to make me feel welcome with lots of water to make me feel at home, even white water. And people were out enjoying that water. In fact, so much so that I was beginning to get fear of missing out. But I stuck to plan A, which was to head for the Old Town. Again, the best part of these old cities. Of course, when you do that, you're going to pass the Freedom Monument with this hourly changing of the guards and onward to the Old Town, which was a hopping place on the day I was there. Something of a festival seemed to be going on. There was a stage with just one show after another, folk dancing, singing, skits, really cool. I could have spent the day there, but I found the people on the ground even more interesting. I mean, there were some strange dudes out there and strange dudettes too. And speaking of them, there were some, I don't know how to put it better, some visibly horny women. But I just looked, I did nothing more because these were women that you do not want to mess with. If you did, you would be literally playing with fire. So I just chilled on some hot tea and checked out the wonderful street cuisine, tried as much as I could, maybe not all of it, and proceeded to just sort of see the action. Little boys trying to impress little girls, adults having their fun, the crafts, demos, and of course, the old city. That's what I came there for. Oh, it's a wonderful place. But these old towns are only so big. And sooner or later, you wander out into the greater town, which are still nice, believe me. But I was a little dismayed with the first thing I saw were a bunch of ugly Kwanzaa type buildings. But that turned out fortuitous because they were the city market. Now, big European cities always have wonderful markets that demand a visit. My favorite parts are the fish section. And I really think it's better than a trip to the aquarium. I mean, these little suckers, they sit still so you can look at them. And you get to observe them in all stages of their life, of course. Don't worry, you vegetarians. There's stuff for you here too. Go see this place. And of course, no market would be complete without a very good flower section. I mean, the winters up there are cold and miserable. Everybody loves some flowers. Well, leaving the market, it's a good chance that you're going to come across the Academy of Science, also known as Stalin's birthday cake. Unfortunately, not all that you see is pleasant in this part of the world, especially the Holocaust reminders. One place there is the foundations of a synagogue where his congregation was immolated by the Nazis. There's a memorial there. There's also a memorial next to it, but it was not to the victims. It was a memorial celebrating the people who risked their lives to hide people from the Nazis and certain death. Well, on to a lighter subject, this city, just like any other, is just filled with beautiful churches. I don't know how they come up with so many ideas for designs, but I enjoy them all. I just love the European embrace of the streetcar. We have a streetcar line going up in my neighborhood, and I'm eagerly awaiting it. The Europeans really love posters, and I consider it an art form, and I have to stop and read every one of those things. But then basically you're here for the details I talked about before, the architecture, just so much there. And then there's another good thing about being in the bigger cities. It's the best place to find good food, lots of choice. I mean, where else could you go to a restaurant and get lamb lungs and bull testicles? Yeah, a real experience. This is just quite a lot of stimulation what I've had been through in a day like this. And at some point, you just may need to decompress. And to do so, what better than to go to one of those wonderful parks I talked about? Go find a bench and sit down on it with a bunch of like-minded souls and ignore each other. No matter how far away you go, some things are just the same. Okay, let's leave the city now. Head for the countryside. And in this case, the Goya, Latvia's pride and joy. The Goya is the longest river inside of Latvia, and part of it is enveloped in a national park. And my plan was to do a 3-day self-support trip down that section. Well, I started in Valmiera, a little town of Valmiera, whose bridge is, thank goodness, still standing because it is not weighted down by lovelocks. The people at the put-in were just saints. When I came back from my shuttle, they insisted on carrying my heavy gear-laden boat to the river, wouldn't let me do it. In spite of one of them, the guy in the stern being over 80 years old. The elder gent, by the way, was an avid big game hunter. He took me on a tour of his house with all the dead animal heads staring down at me. And then he gave me 2 cans, self-canned tins of meat, self-harvested, of course, one of wild boar, the other of moose. So I would not starve. And I did eat them, but not until I got home. The Goya would be the first of many rivers on this trip graced by these beautiful sandstone cliffs. Oh, I just love the details in them. But even if they didn't have the details, even a plain cliff can be nice. You know that. Gee, just get an overhang on a sunny day. So you know what I mean. Well, one of the other nice things about this river were the frequent prepared campsites. In this supposedly tick-infested region, it was really nice to have a clean mowed lawn to pitch a tent on. It was nice to have steps to get up to high mud banks. And the other amenities are pretty nice too. Also, these places, they had these informative kiosks, and they were trilingual, Russian, English, and Latvian, and it told you where the campsites were and how far apart they were, everything you needed for a trip. You could just wing it, no prior planning. And expanding on my earlier remarks about these countries' hygiene standards, even the outhouses were spotless. Composting toilets, I believe. Now, this was just a placid route, but it was pretty remote, only crossed by a few bridges and an old ferry that's still operational. Now, I told you there are sandstone cliffs along here, yet one of them had a cave, so maybe my geology's off, I don't know. Even had a stream coming out of it, very strange. One day on the trip, oh, by the way, this is a popular river, but I never saw anyone, just a sign that at least one person was on the river. It was pretty clear how they did their shuttle. Well, one afternoon I was treated to a great display of lenticular clouds. These things are often mistaken for flying saucers. Then again, maybe I did see flying saucers and I was mistaking them for lenticular clouds. I'll never know. One afternoon, oh yeah, besides that, after a successful cruise, I like to celebrate with a good meal, don't you? Well, in this case, I sought out a restaurant in a nearby old town of Chasis, found it in an elegant but inexpensive hotel. Beautiful place. This place even made a carafe of water special. And the goulash soup was grand, and the presentation was the equal of what I would expect in France. And when I finished, in the twilight, I used the remaining light to explore the town with its old castle. One thing that stuck in my mind was a plaque on a side street. And if you can't read through the glare. It says here people were humiliated and tortured and their homes, families, freedom, and lives were taken away. A reminder that the years of Soviet occupation were not appreciated. Well, the Goya has a tributary called the Brasla, and I thought maybe doing it would be a first ascent. I'd be so proud of that. So I showed up at where I was going to put in, and that popped my fantasy bubble. Yeah, it was a water trail. Millions have been down it before, but I had it to myself that day. The Brasla 2 is graced by reddish sandstone and moves along nicely, a small stream dropping into the valley of a big stream. You know how that works. A most common riverside greenery there is the alder, something I'm sure you're used to here in Pennsylvania, but in Europe, it grows as a tree, not a shrub. It makes the worst imaginable strainers. Very tough. There's a trail along part of the Brasla, and that was a classroom on this day. Perhaps I was the featured subject. I would have preferred better weather then, but it sure was pretty when it cleared up. Now, up along the northern border of Latvia is the Salacha, for which I devoted 2 days, two one-day trips. I felt this river was welcoming me with a potential feast in the put-in eddy. Oh well, I wasn't that hungry yet. It's apparently a popular stream too. There are signs, like a canoe passage on a footbridge. Great idea, huh? Again, some parts were graced with these beautiful cliffs, some parts not, just quiet meadows. I bet you think that's pretty dull, but even that can be exciting. Like when a bear decided to swim across the river in front of me. I researched it and found out that these European brown bears are essentially grizzlies. So I was glad it was not hungry. Maybe it was going for those apples in the eddy. I was also pleasantly surprised that the stream had lots of easy rapids on the thing, rapids that kept up almost all the way down to the sea, which is where I ended my trip, at a little fishing village. A fishing village that's specialized in lampreys. Can you believe that I'm not ever eaten a lamprey? I thought I would at the local restaurant, but it wasn't on the menu. Had to settle for salmon. Well, after my salmon, there's still a little daylight left, and I found a wonderful little nature reserve nearby to explore. So I parked my car and hurried off across the bog on a boardwalk in the gathering twilight with more than enough time for the sunset over the Baltics. Now, this is not actually such a big deal. If you've never been to the North Country, understand that the farther north you go, the gentler the angle the sun goes down, to the point you get far enough north, late enough into the summer, and it doesn't go down at all. So sunsets can last for a long time. In fact, if your goal was to see the stars come out or see the northern lights, you're going to have to stay up until midnight, probably. Well, it's only natural now to progress to Estonia. And again, I took leave of the river to see its capital, Tallinn, with its World Heritage Old Town and more. When I entered the city, it was anything but old, a bustling modern place. And the simple but honest peasant folk were just not like what I had imagined beforehand. But I followed the music and soon enough was in the old town with a zillion other tourists, many of which arrive in slugs from cruise ships. Again, you just can't totally get away from the American influence, but it's a pretty good place otherwise. Now, part of the terms of my partner allowing me to go on these 6-week or 7-week trips alone, leaving her at home, is that I sure well better bring her back a nice gift. Jewelry will do just fine. So when traveling up here in the Baltic States, that meant Baltic amber. Beautiful stuff, so much to choose from. She was happy when I got home. Well, that task being taken care of, it was off through town, gawking at more churches and fortifications and statuary and architectural flourishes. Oh, just so much to snap pictures at. Sometimes that just gets oppressive though. So it may just be worth your time to put the camera away and just purchase a local artist's rendition of what you saw. It'll still bring back memories. Now, you know, these cities are happy places now, but 1,000 years ago, there was a hostile world out there, and they were all circled by walls to keep out the barbarians. This city has one of the best preserved walls you'll find anywhere, but it was not strong enough to keep me in. So I wandered outside and came across this wonderful outdoor art exhibit. Really neat. Apparently, it was associated with the upcoming flower festival. My favorite exhibit was the bog. And I know you're not fast enough to read everything, but I'm sure you, like me, will love the caricatures of the carnivorous plants and the giant cranberries. And best of all, and I can't say I've seen this in a real bog, the maiden being swallowed up. What was on this artist's mind? The other exhibits are cool too, maybe just not as much so. Some were disturbing, at least to my sensibilities, not my idea of a good canoe trip. Well, having cleaned my mental palate, I went back into the old town, enjoying the architecture in the old city and all the things that make Tallinn great. And once again, there are incursions, but sometimes they're amusing. But there's some good things about outside influences, like fusion food. I mean, what happens when you combine Indian cooking, East Indian cooking, with Baltic cooking? You get moose curry and moose vindaloo and moose korma. Yeah. Well, there was a wonderful selection of cuisine in a place like this. And I'm so proud I managed to slip in without a reservation into the best traditional restaurant in town, or best rated anyway. The main rub was great, but let me tell you about the dessert. It's called kama. This is buttermilk combined with a mixture of boiled, roasted, ground peas, rye, barley, and wheat. Yeah, I know, it sounds gross, but it was delicious, honest. Yet, as good as satisfied as I sure would have liked to have been able to try some of the other eateries, like the one next door, specializing in faux medieval type dishes. Just the ambiance is worthwhile. Now, if you've ever traveled in Europe, you know that in tourist towns, restaurants are not passive about getting your business. There's always somebody outside whose job is to lure you in. Well, things being slow on that day, I had the pleasure of a long and delightful conversation with such a woman. And the feeling must have been mutual because after a while, she insisted on introducing me to her teenage daughter who was tending a bar and treating me to a strong drink. What amazed me, by the way, was that the girl's English, or should I say American, was so good, you would have thought that she was born and raised in the USA. I felt a bit guilty, I must say, tying them up for so long and not bringing business. After all, that's what they're there for. So I did go in, at least for a cup of tea, and listen to the traditional music. It was wonderful. All right, enough of the big city and its strange people. On to the hinterland in Lahima National Park. Lahima snuggles along the north side of Estonia, along the Gulf of Finland. It offers a variety of experiences. Inland, I recommend one hike on a wonderful nature trail. One of the things that's really great is that it has bilingual interpretive exhibits, so you can really figure out what's going on. I mean, this is not true in a lot of European countries I've been in. So it's just made for turkeys like me. You start in the lush uplands and descend into the lush lowlands. And the exhibits explain what's happening to you, by the way. I had a preference for the lowlands. Spring was just really popping out along the ground. So much, whether it's just greening up or flowering up, she wandered through the marshy place, well taken care of. And it was only going to get better and better. And even if something wasn't alive, something was living. You know how it is. And it's easy to see all this stuff because they have the best infrastructure. Now, as I said, these national parks are not necessarily pristine. This is a fairly new one. And before it was there, in the piney uplands, they used to harvest the sap from the trees to make turpentine. And the scars of those are still left. Well, another trail you should take, and it's in the same area, is a history trail. Tell you what traditional life in rural Estonia was like. So you see old buildings with explanations, old walls, and my favorite, the wolf trap. Really, they put a lamb in there, and apparently the wolves were going in there, and I don't know why they couldn't get out, but shoot, time tested them. They worked. At least that's what they tell me. Well, the real star of the show in this national park is the Seashore, which consists of 3 long peninsulas jutting out into the Gulf of Finland and the bays in between. This is a national park, so all wildlife is sacred here. But one thing that is different is that unlike our tightly regulated national parks, camping is free and it's dispersed, seemingly reflecting the attitude of nearby Scandinavia that the land belongs to the people. But one thing going for it is that these people actually do take care of it, so you don't find a lot of litter or vandalism, though I do have more to say about that a little bit later. Those peninsulas are pretty rocky places, and I went and camped out on one of them, the longest one, the northernmost point in Estonia. And it's really cool to think that if one of those lookout towers were there, I could probably see 50 miles across the water the lights of Helsinki. But there was no lookout tower, and I had to content myself with the setting sun as the only light. But that was good enough. Beautiful place to spend the night. Well, last but not least, this park introduces you to an iconic Estonian feature, a bog. No maidens there, though, sorry. A long boardwalk makes this possible. You'll get to see tons of cotton grass. And you don't have to go to Estonia for this, by the way. If you just go paddle in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, you'll get to see some of this stuff. But it's just much more interesting when you see it there. And there's plenty of standing water around. And for the view, they do have a lookout tower, maybe not as tall as the Empire State Building. And it's partially handicap accessible too, which is nice. But the view's fine, but I like to see what's down closer to the ground. And of course, I might not feel that way in another couple of weeks when the bugs hatch. And they are coming. You could tell just by the salivating dragonflies that you saw everywhere. The feast was coming, yes. But let's go paddling again. The Radna Yogi is probably not worth your time to do. But if you decide to do so, you'll get to pass through a yak ranch. You ever seen a yak? I never had until then. Well, by the way, traveling between these rivers is interesting too. I appreciated the wood frame architecture that you see everywhere. Very Pacific Northwest sort of look to the place. And these people must have a real commitment to the environmental protection when they even go so far as to have green roofs on their mailboxes. Well, as far as I can tell, all of the river paddling in Estonia seems to be in the southeast, up near Russia. In some cases, don't miss the takeout without having a visa on hand. I think yogi means river. In Finland, they call them joki. The languages seem similar, though the Estonians don't think so. Nationalism. The Amayogi is a big river connecting 2 big lakes. It's totally uncomplicated, well, as long as you don't get caught in the fish nets. But it was a long slog to the takeout, and I barely made it by dark. This was the university city of Tartu, and I was famished, so I spurned searching for traditional fare and was more than glad to gorge on a salad and pizza. Oh yeah, ice cream's not a bad idea either. And it worked. It replenished my strength to go on to more rivers like the Onayogi and the Ayayogi. My lasting memory of the former was a structure that was either a sauna or someone's camp, probably the latter, It's just like here in Pennsylvania. You go along Susquehanna and you see old school buses and tar paper shacks and anything that'll keep out the rain. They're like that over there too. My memories of the latter river included this one free campsite. There are lots of free campsites all around the Baltic states, but what really charmed me here was that they provided with you firewood for you. Not only that, but they had a log splitter there with instructions on how to use it. Is that not neat? The rivers had some lovely shuttles past traditional structures and fields of rape, which were all in flower at this time of year, and contrasting with the yellow were the lilac, which were also in peak bloom right now. I was certainly surprised to see people in rafts on these placid streams, but whatever floats your boat, right? The clearish waters supported a luxuriant growth of aquatic grass. And again, red cliffs grace the bends. But here's a dirty little secret. Most of these cliffs within several feet of the waterline have been defaced by graffiti. It's pretty soft rock. It's really sad, but it's pretty obvious that paddlers are the vandals. But the good thing is that if you view these from a distance, you really can't see that stuff. It's a beautiful place. And thank goodness they haven't figured out a way to vandalize the ferns outside of maybe gathering fiddleheads a little bit earlier. Well, the Vahandu Yogi is the longest river in Estonia. It's perhaps the most popular stream, the site of an annual race. It too takes you past cliffs, beautiful cliffs, and meadows, and past old mills. And this stream even has rapids on it. Now, if some of you are just not into whitewater, don't worry. Those race organizers, they look out for you. They'll show you the way. Now, if you remember earlier, I stated that I had little information on where to paddle. That all changed one day when I dropped in on a little tourism office in a little town in Estonia. I was just hoping for maybe just a few livery brochures to give me an idea where the good paddling might be. But the woman instead reached under the desk and presented with me for free this amazing guide. It was a plastic container filled with 46 brochures on rivers, river maps, river profiles, narrative of what you'll see, bilingual, just like those displays on the kiosks. They were just awesome. Where were these when I did my internet search? So let's use that information and start working our way south, back to Latvia. Now, I admit I did the ogre just for its name, but maybe it's kind of lived up to that name. There were some challenges, fearsome giant insects at the put in, lowish water. And then there was this little dam, I mean like 6 or 7 feet high, but definitely a portage, which shouldn't have been so great, except the portage was guarded by aggressive goats. Now, obviously, this turned out okay because I'm here to talk to you today, but it took a while. But I was really not prepared for the end of the portage. No water. Yeah, the river below the dam was just a dribble. What had apparently happened was that the operator had shut off the water, maybe to raise the pool. So I prepared for many grim miles, just as in the middle of nowhere, many grim miles of poling and dragging. But I paddled hard, and slowly the river seemed to be getting wetter and wetter. And eventually I was on full flow. And what apparently had happened was that they must have shut off the river just before I got there. And I caught up with the bubble. Oh, opportunity like that doesn't knock twice. Very lucky. I'm also glad I did the Abava. If for any reason, the shuttle, which took me through a town with more scarecrows than live human beings, and in that town, there was this amazing mural. You could just stare at that for hours. The country that the river flows through is a bucolic and rolling, and the river flows in mostly a placid manner. I say mostly. There was one anomaly called a rumba, And it was about 3 or 4 feet high, not Niagara, but the saving grace was that it's just covered with this thick mat of moss, and you could just slide over it anywhere, not putting a scratch in your boat, because I do paddle a glass boat. Well, I had a good day, and again, I celebrated with a hearty meal. Oh yeah, forgot to mention the stream, and it's more of that grass is clean water and stream side banks. I celebrated with that great meal. I just can't stop thinking about food. I should have eaten before I talked to you. And of course, once again, tying in with eating gives me a chance once again to confirm that Baltic restrooms rock. Doesn't take much to impress me, I guess. Well, the Abava flows into the Venta, where you can see what they tout as Europe's widest waterfall, the Ventus Rumba. Well, are you sufficiently impressed? Nearby is the town, one of the Latvia's most charming towns called Kuldiga. And it's so nice. And what a contrast to the tourist choke madness of Tallinn or Riga. No cruise ships can come to this place. And I had it pretty much to myself. Highly recommended. And my favorite spot, by the way, was on a side street. There's this little park, and it's lined by these fanciful wooden sculptures. Really neat. Well, I hope this doesn't sound too morbid, but one of the things I do whenever I go to a new culture is to check how they treat their dead. And I did so here, and it's interesting. And these countries, quite often, the cemeteries are back in the forest, which just fits my stereotype of the people there. Just really nice, so natural and serene, and even using natural materials there too. So go check out them cemeteries. Let's head for the seashore. I found this wonderful free campground, big campground. I had it all to myself. Just imagine laying down your sleeping bag and staring out at the ocean. No disturbances. And if you're not into camping, it's a good place for a picnic too, if you can deal with the ants. Well, I braved some threatening weather the next day to take a lonely hike on the beach at Cape Kolka. This is where the Gulf of Riga meets the Baltic Sea, if you go and look at the map again later. And yeah, I see some of you doubting. I was brave, as in 2005, a major superstorm, like you read about in the news, devastated this coast and uprooted or buried part of its old maritime forest. But that didn't happen on the day I was there. If you're not the camping type, you can rent some cute little cabins, a bed in some of these cute little cabins. I peered into them. Oh, I fell in love with them, but I would not want to be there in a superstorm. There are fish in the Baltic Sea and there's commercial fishing, but no nearby harbor. So the captain of the one boat I saw, he just at the end of the day ran his boat ashore, yards from the shore, jumped on in with a rope in hand, attached it to a tractor, and dragged his boat on shore. That was cool enough. I was wondering, how do you do that in reverse? Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to stay around until his next launch and find out. But it would be interesting, a challenge. Well, let's go beachcombing for a little while. And the reason I want to do this is that when I grew up, I was always taught about Europe being this overpopulated, crowded place, people elbow to elbow. And so I wouldn't figure the seashores would be very interesting. But in my travels all around the continent, I have found more miles of wild, untouched seashore than proportionally than anything I find here in the US. Really nice. And I hope you enjoy wandering around it too. Well, but let's go paddling again. We'll leave the seashore. And there's a nearby river worth doing. It's called the Irby. It starts off mundanely enough, just a country stream, but in a riot of purple, lilacs, lupin, and other colors too. What was special about this stream is it cut sort of a canyon. I know it's a bit of exaggeration, through a line of old sand dunes. So I call it the Sand Canyon. And of course, the bottom of the river is sandy too. No rapids. It was a bit of a long trip. And if you are caught by dark, don't worry. When you get to the end, there will be light of some sort, maybe even a foghorn. Well, this is another one of those rivers, by the way, that the shuttles is interesting, the river itself. It takes you by an old decaying Soviet complex, and it was originally used by them to spy on the West. Well, now it's a radio astronomy observatory, and there are tours, how the world has changed. Well, heading down the coast, you come to the port city of Ventspils, and this is a place known both for its flower sculptures, which are truly amazing things. I'd like to see how they put them together. And its fascination with cows. I can't find an explanation, but there's about 30 or so of these things all around the town. A great outlet for artistry. And the most famous is probably the traveling cow. And I get the impression it really does travel. So maybe you'll see it someday here in Harrisburg. Well, continuing south, the forge southwest, we'll return now to Lithuania for a visit to the country's most outstanding natural feature, Kironian Spit. No, not that sort of spit. I mean like a sand spit. That is a barrier island that is not an island because it's connected to the mainland at one end. Kironian is a national park, partially within Lithuania, partially within Kaliningrad. A short ferry ride gets you from the mainland. I mean short, I could have swum that. I didn't really want to. An ever-widening lagoon separates the spit from the mainland. It was so inviting on the day I was there, but if I'd come a few months earlier, when it freezes over, I'd probably be ice fishing to amuse myself. There's plenty of nature here, but also a human imprint. Because like I say, you get villages and stuff like that. My favorite village seemed to specialize in reed sculpture. It's very interesting. And I consider myself lucky because I got to actually observe a craftsman putting one of these things together. And he spoke good English and explained to me or answered all my questions. And I found out that all of this activity culminates each year with a festival. And the festival ends with them torching all these things. I would have loved to take one home, but don't think it would have fit in my baggage. And of course, it's a national park. You expect to see wildlife there. There's apparently deer and wild boar. All I saw were snakes. And somebody told me it actually might be a legless lizard. No kidding. So any herpetologists out there, it's what you see. And ants. But I'm sure the animals were watching me as I walked the trail through the woods on the way to the beach. That's how you get there. You don't drive to the beach here. And what you find is another desolate, wild, wonderful beach. And one thing I found back in the woods was very interesting. And there was an explanatory sign. Unfortunately, it was not bilingual, but it was pretty clear by the pictures that it is a hearing aid. Only instead of you plugging it into your ear, you plug yourself into it. Cool idea, right? Well, as I said, there's plenty of villages around here, but they are resort villages and very tasteful. I could stay in one of them. One thing that caught my fancy was the signs for the way to the beach. These people aim to please. There's a beach for nude baiters, beach for clothed baiters, beach for if you're female and nude, if you're male and nude, something for everybody. Very good. Another thing you'll see are weather vanes. I don't really quite understand it, but it's in the culture. A lot of creativity in weather vanes. Now, I said this is a spit, a sand spit. So needless to say, there are sand dunes, and they get pretty darn big. And the biggest one you can climb. There's a trail to the top to help preserve it. And when you get there, you can see for a long way, specifically into Russia. That's as close as I've ever gotten to the place. Very interesting. Well, you know, nearly 6 weeks have passed by. Zipped by just like that. Oh, it's time to start thinking about my retreat. I caught one more river in Lithuania and then set my sights for one final feast of indigenous food, and it would be in the Kaunas, Lithuania's second largest city. So with that, let me tell you, please, one last story. Everybody knows about the importance of first impressions, but last impressions are just as important. The Lonely Planet tourist guidebook that I had recommended a good traditional restaurant somewhere downtown. I knew not where it was. I had no good map or GPS. I just simply headed downtown as fast as I could, parked, and walked up what seemed like would be a main street until I found a crowd of 20-somethings hanging out. I asked if anyone understood English. Stupid question there. Not surprisingly, they all did. But two women came forward to help. They looked up the restaurant on their smartphone, confirmed the favorable reviews and affordable prices. Boy, they sure had me sized up. And directed me toward it. But we continued for quite some time just to chat, they learning of my unusual lifestyle and purpose for being in their country. And of course, whenever I travel, people are always asking, oh, are you visiting somebody? Or if not that, where are you staying? Which really means what hotel? And that's what they ask, what hotel are you staying at? And I told them, I just drive into the woods and sleep in my car each night. At that point, they kind of looked at each other, and one of them says to me, well, I know that sounds crazy, but if you'd like to stay at our place, you're welcome to do so. Well, there I was, a total stranger, unbathed and unshaved for 6 weeks, dirty, unstylish clothes. At home, such people would walk wide paths around me. They probably wouldn't make eye contact, to say the least. And here these two women were offering me a couch to crash on. Well, that was my wonderful last impression of this lovely region. But it was so consistent with the treatment that I had enjoyed for the last 5.5 weeks. So can you blame me for being sad to leave, to not really want to see my boat going onto the airplane? But when it did, there was no changing my mind. But the good side of it all was that I'm back safe and sound, and I've had a chance tonight to tell you the story of this wonderful place. I hope you get there someday. Thank you. Well, if I can stop share, I will return as a live human being. And
Sure.
if you
Ed,
have,
we had you on mute, so we just want to show you that we were clapping.
thank you, thank you. Zoom's not very good on that.
No. We do want to open it up for questions. If anybody does have any questions, you're either welcome to come up and stand in the window so Ed can see you, or ask it from your seat, and if you can't hear you, I'll assist. Any questions?
Yeah, they just stay there for the last night.
Ed, they want to know if you stayed with the two women that offered the couch.
Yeah, I know. I probably should have explained that there. No, I thanked them profusely, but I had a flight going out in another day and a half, and I don't like to cut these things too short. So my plan was to go eat, get in my car, and drive 3 hours toward the frontier of Poland and sleep a few hours and keep on driving. So, but I hope they understand. I really appreciated it.
Nice.
Don't be shy.
I have a question. How easy is it to get a boat like yours on an airplane?
Well, this is an important question for me, and it has been for a long time. And it's evolved over the years. The first time I went to Europe, maybe there's more you want to hear, but back in '84, I think it was, I disguised myself as a coach on the junior US team. They let me go along, and I pretend it was one of their race boats, and they got in a special deal. And then I left my boat there with some friends I made, and that's what I did for years. Things got better later on, and for many years I flew with British Air, and then that got bad. They stopped carrying boats. But then I discovered Lufthansa had the world's most liberal baggage policy. They'll carry anything. They'll charge you more, but they'll carry anything, pole vaults, you name it. So for about 10 or more years, I flew with Lufthansa, and they didn't even blink when I show up with the thing. And you're probably wondering how much it costs, usually about $300 each way. And just in 2019, before COVID started, and I thought I was going to do another trip, I started shopping for new air tickets. And just to play it safe, I checked the baggage rules, and Lufthansa finally changed and got with the times. They have a 315 centimeter length limit now, so I'm shut out forever. But I should mention that that's another thing Susan does. So when I fly to Dulles, typically I drive over to her house, park my car there, and she drives me to the airport. So I'm not paying for 6 weeks of airport parking.
Very generous.
Susan's airport parking and shuttle service.
So Ed, I do have a question. You talked about you'd put in and then it would be a long day. Like how many hours or how many miles did you on average travel a day?
Gosh, I should have brought up my notes or something like that. When I'm in Europe, I usually keep it down to less than 20 miles, except when I goofed up. Because, I mean, for me, 20 miles not an inordinately long trip, but I don't want really to get caught in a bad situation, especially after dark, when you got to go for help and ask help from somebody who doesn't understand what you're talking about. But I've had some long ones. I screwed up in France a few years ago. The guidebook was wrong. I swear, that stupid German guidebook. And what I thought was like about a 15-mile trip was, I think, 35 miles. So I need to get back to them about that.
Ed, Liz Deardorff here. Good to see you. I wanted to ask, thinking back to the title of your presentation, what was the locals' impression of the political positioning of Putin? And did you get to talk to anybody about it?
I never did. By the way, this is a good time to talk about language. There's an impression by a lot of Americans that most people around the world speak English. They just pretend that they don't. Well, that may be true in tourist destinations, but around most of the world, they really don't speak English. But the exception are some of the small countries of Europe, like the Netherlands, where they got to survive. They really need to be able to speak other languages. And definitely the Baltic States and Scandinavia, they're very good about teaching English. So like that young woman in the bar. However, in my conversations, I never had a deep one about that. But you'll notice I took monologues for 5 different languages in 3 different countries. And that's because there is a sizable ethnic population of Russians and in those countries. And that's part of the reason why there's concern, because like Eastern Ukraine, you have people that might be happier if they're back in Russia.
Any other questions? So Ed, there's a question about, can you really, really hitchhike for every shuttle?
Hitchhiking has been the mainstay in my shuttle everywhere, including in the United States. In fact, often it's the best part of my day. I meet some really interesting people, and they're not chainsaw killers. People who stop are people who are with empathy. And so I consider them the salt of the earth. So much for preaching. In Europe, you have options a lot of times. One of the problems in the Baltic states is with those low populations, your shuttle road might not have anyone come along for a long time. So I took advantage of public transit when I could. I used a lot of buses, but I did a lot of hitchhiking. And last but not least, and this happens here too, A lot of times when you go knock on that door to leave the boat there, the good-hearted individuals will say, well, I'll follow you down and drive you back. I still stay in contact with some of these people, the ones that go far above and beyond. In fact, there's one couple in the Catskills that I've been corresponding with for 30 years. They picked me up in a snowstorm, waited for me to take out with a cup of hot coffee, and then followed me to my next river and shuttled me on that. I don't tend to forget deeds like that.
Very nice. Anything else? Okay. Well, certainly we would like to express our appreciation and thank you very much for sharing your 6-week trip to the Baltics with us. And Susan, again, thank you so much for all of your technical assistance today. But one more time, thank you, Ed and Susan. Okay.